Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Michael Turner Samuels, and we are going to discuss the potential of wind power following his recent article in the Alderney Journal. Michael, good to see you today.
Good, thank you. Very, very, very nice to be here.
And we've certainly got a load of wind at the moment, I can tell you. It's been gusting pretty heavily for the last 24, 48 hours. So there we are. But you've obviously calculated that winds around Alderney, the wind speeds are much higher than in other parts of the UK. How do you actually get to those stats?
Well, there is publicly available information on wind speeds, um, which have been mapped around all the coasts of certainly Europe. I don't know if it includes maybe the world,
Mm,
and has been done in order to provide people with information on opportunities for offshore wind power.
right,
Uh,
okay.
and ours shows something like a little over 9.5 meters per second, which is how they measure it. And interestingly, just today I saw a report. The second quarter in the UK, they had a very good wind generation quarter, and they said part of the reason was because the wind speeds were higher than they were the previous year, and that they were 4 meters per second. So you can see that our wind speed is is a lot better
Yeah,
average,
very much so. Now,
assuming the public data is correct. You know.
yeah, yeah. Well, we've got to always make assumptions like that, haven't we?
Yeah.
Right. So, having had a look at the article, you're suggesting that a possible location would be west of the Casquets. But for our viewers who don't know the geography too well, it's basically how many miles would you say it's off Alderney? Three, four?
Well, Casquets is 8 miles away from Alderney.
Okay.
So we're talking about an area which would be no closer than, let's say, 8 miles from the western end of our island.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, in this regard, we're very lucky that Casquets is included as part of the territory of Alderney, because then the 12-mile limit extends beyond Casquets, so goes much further away from Alderney.
What about the proximity to the shipping lane? Is it fairly close there at that point, or are the ships a bit further out?
Well, the main channel shipping lane is further north, and there are indeed something like 200 ships a day
Yeah.
going east, and they do cross through the territorial waters or around Albany, but they are separated from the area that we're looking at by a specified separation zone, which those long distance ships are not supposed to go through.
So you're
Uh,
pretty happy that that's not an issue. Now, who actually owns the seabed? Because there's some sort of quirk here. Generally speaking, in the UK, it's owned by the Crown, but I think there was a bit of a conveyancing situation whereby Alderney ended up with the 3 mile bit. Is that correct?
that I think yes, there is some grey. It's a bit of a grey area, I think,
Mm.
but we have, I think, our seabed out to 3 miles, which includes then the 3 miles around Casquets,
Yeah.
west of Casquets. The other 9 miles is probably still in the legal ownership of the Crown, but there's every reason to believe that that's not a problem. They will either join in any license to install a wind farm out there, or in advance of that, they might just give us the rights over it.
Yeah, because obviously, the king in particular is very keen on green products,
Absolutely.
and from that point of view, you might have a bit of influence from above coming down to the Crown Commissioners, I guess. But there we are. How deep is the sea, Michael, at the point that you're suggesting?
It ranges from about 50 meters. I mean, there are some parts of it are less than that, um, to getting closer to 70 or 80 meters. And in a way, the zone, splits into two because there are two ways of securing an offshore wind turbine. One is by sticking it into the seabed
Mm.
on a big pole of some sort or another. And they can do that up to about 60 meters.
Right.
And then you go beyond that. There's more or relatively new technology coming online, which is called floating wind turbines, which are then just anchored to the seabed, but are actually floating on the sea surface, and they can go up to any depth that we've got.
And these floating ones, would they be able to deal with the same sort of wind speed that the rigid ones would?
Yes, I mean they are newer technology. There are a number of test sites which have been up and running for some time. There are a number of different designs as well, which until perhaps one is being more settled on, you need to get the economics of volume. So at the moment, they aren't actually, I would say, commercially viable,
Mm.
but they are due to become commercially viable within the next sort of 5 to 10 years because it opens up so much more energy space to all the countries that have got a coastline.
And looking at the UK, there's quite a few in the North Sea, aren't there, at the moment? Presumably they're rigid, are they, in terms of the construction?
Yeah, so I think there's a test area of Scotland for
Mm.
floating,
Hmm.
but the amount of floating installed, as I say, is relatively small, not the size of a big wind farm yet. Um, and there are a number of areas which are only suitable for floating, which have already been licensed by Crown Estates or Crown Estates Scotland.
Yeah.
So developers are, they know it's coming and they are interested in capturing sites and territories that they could install their wind farms in.
Okay. Um, we've got a bit of a crazy situation with the new government insofar as they seem to want to build wind turbine farms on the land rather than in the sea. What's the rationale of that? Any ideas?
Well, you're talking about the UK government.
Yeah.
Yes, I think the previous government decided to ban it. I think the present government are going to say, well, look, it's just a matter of local planning
Mm.
and local people can decide. But,
Mm.
why rule out the opportunity of getting more wind energy? Onshore wind energy is cheaper than offshore wind energy for obvious reasons
Yeah.
of installation and maintenance, etc. So there are reasons, I think that's their thinking. Um, they just say, well, let's leave it up to local communities to decide.
Mm. Mm. Can't imagine there'd be too many communities that would be that keen to have 50 turbines in a field next to them, but
No, but there are already
yeah,
onshore wind
yeah,
turbines.
yeah.
There are places where they can be acceptable, and local communities would obtain some benefit. They would obtain or should obtain some economic benefit from
Mm.
there being a wind farm there.
Mm. Okay, that would be an interesting one to watch. Shetland has
Mm.
recently come into the equation in terms of wanting to put in a fairly large wind turbine station, producing 443 megawatts. That's 40% of a gigawatt, isn't it?
It's nearly nearly half a gigawatt. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And just to get things clear, I believe currently the total capacity of the UK is about 60 gigawatts. So that's sort of even a half a gigawatt makes quite a contribution, I guess, to lighting houses and things.
Yes, I mean, you see different numbers being quoted, but 1 gigawatt is, they say, I mean, you could say on average, sufficient to power or provide the electricity needs of 1 million homes.
Mm, mm,
Um, so the thing is that the need for electricity, the more we reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, the more we're going to need electricity to replace it,
yeah.
to build other fuels, which are then green fuels. So demand's going to go up.
And of course, we're seeing that this on this very day in terms of the last coal-fired power station in the UK closing. So, that's Once you get to that sort of situation, they've got to start moving fairly quickly, I think, in terms of sort of improving the number of renewables that are around. But there we are. In the Alderney scheme, let's call it the Alderney scheme for argument's sake, how many wind turbines would you envisage there?
Well, I mean, the area is probably suitable for 2 to 3 gigawatts in
Right.
total,
Yeah.
but a fair bit of that would need to be the floating type. Um, but let's talk about 1 gigawatt. Of course, it all depends what size turbine you install. They're now installing, they tend to be between 12 and 15 megawatts. So for a 1 gigawatt wind farm, you need something like 67, 15 megawatt turbines.
Yeah.
Or if they were 10 megawatts, it would be 100 of them. Yeah, spread out over something like well over 100 square kilometers. So you've got at least a kilometer between each turbine.
Yeah. I mean, what would the resilience be like in terms of the present gales that we're having, 50-mile-an-hour gusts? Can they take that easily, or would you have to close it down?
They can certainly take it. There have been, they've got a lot installed around Scotland, and they get
Mm,
some pretty fierce weather, as we know. There are some installed also in hurricane areas, and there was a report recently that a couple of wind turbines were damaged in a hurricane. But they're learning, they're developing their technology all the time, and clearly any developer would want to install turbines of sufficient strength
mm.
to meet whatever they felt would be the fiercest winds we might ever get.
Yeah, and the equipment is there to do that. In
Yes,
terms of the actual general design and the
yes,
capability. Yeah.
yes. I mean, the equipment's all there. This is experience coming from the offshore oil industry, which has got tons of experience.
Mm, mm. Now, obviously, you have to hook all of these things into one another, interweave them, as it were, and you need a control room to presumably to actually take the current in and push the current out. Where would the location of that be? The control room,
Well, the control room, it doesn't necessarily, the current doesn't necessarily come into the control room.
right?
This is just a sort of a remote control station. But there would be a control room, and that could well be placed on Alderney if we wanted it. It's one of the benefits that developers say they bring to local communities, that
Mm,
they will build something which that community wants and which will be useful to the developer. And that could well be on, a new building on in the Bray area, which has had plans suggested around it.
mm.
Or indeed, what would be rather nice would be if they might refurbish one of the unused forts.
I was thinking, retain the facade of Fort Torsey and stick it in there.
Exactly. Wouldn't that
Yeah.
be lovely?
I don't know
Um,
how that would go down with the Alderney Society, but
Well, I mean, if they kept it, if they kept the exterior well, if they did it well,
yeah, absolutely.
hopefully it would be acceptable, and it's probably bigger than their needs. They could make
Yeah,
some of it into accommodation as well.
yeah. Now, long distance power stations inevitably require converter stations. And I think you have you got something to show us on that one?
Yes, offshore substations. Let me see if I can get this up. If I go here and choose what I want to send you.
This is new stuff, folks. This is going into mega technology as far as Tony.at.12 is concerned. And Michael at this point is in charge. So, do I click?
Well, I don't know. Can you see anything yet?
No, not yet. It
You
says it
then
started screen sharing.
okay. I don't know if you need to accept it in some way, but you should be able to.
Here we are.
Yeah, okay. That is a picture of a real offshore substation. As you can see, it's a pretty big piece of kit.
Mm.
But the good thing about it, from our point of view, is it sits out in the wind farm fields.
Yeah.
And you can see that, I mean, on that one, there are sort of some pipes, apart from the legs, there are some thinner pipes going up into it, and they bring in the electricity from each turbine,
Yeah.
mix it all together, and turn it into whatever is needed to send it out again.
Okay. So, that would be the all that you need. You connect all the wind turbines up through this central point and then distribute it out from there. Do we know at
Yeah.
this stage what the situation is in terms of, is it DC or AC or what?
Well, that would be very much up to them to decide what they want
Yeah.
to do. It would depend probably on where it's going, because the vast bulk of it, of course, needs to go to either France or the UK or both.
Well, to my mind, France is the obvious candidate. Plug into the French grid, and then send it through the French grid up to wherever we need it, as it were. That's clever, Michael. You come back to full screen again. Well done.
There you go. Yes, I mean France is clearly the obvious choice from a point of view of distance. Um, there are already some opportunities for connection there that are being discussed. I mean, there's the connection from the St. Bruick wind farm down south of Jersey,
Hmm.
which is obviously a connection point into their grid. But connecting into nations' grids is one of the key points that has to be decided and discussed, obviously, with the country, and then put into their planning.
I mean, looking at it as it is, it's a great idea. It's a huge amount of capacity you're creating. So, from Alderney's point of view, I think our annual consumption is virtually zilch, isn't it? Looking at the potential there.
Yeah, I mean, we would want a feed from the wind farm. It would be tiny. It would be less than probably a half of 1% of
Yeah,
all their output.
yeah.
Um, but it would enable us to increase our electricity usage. It would be cheaper electricity, so which would encourage people to start converting their heating systems and things to electricity, and would mean also that we could maybe take on a few new businesses which use
Mm.
electricity, like server
Yeah,
stations,
data centers. Yeah,
data
that sort
centers.
of
Yeah,
thing. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's interesting. So from that point of view, it would be quite easy to sort of say, as part of the deal, you've got to provide electricity to Alderney. And we both agreed that ultimately oil-fired central heating is not the way to progress, is it?
That is not progress, unfortunately. It's
Mm.
not at all. It's retrograde now, isn't it?
But
And
but
well, I mean, everybody says, "Oh yeah, but even Alderney as a total isn't going to change what happens to the world." That's true, but if everybody says that, nothing,
mm,
we're
yeah,
heading for disaster.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
we should all play our part. But I
Mm.
think, the real reason for exploring this opportunity is not necessarily that, it's the economic benefits that it would bring to the island.
Yeah, very much so. Right. Looking at taking it forward, how would you suggest they get a developer on board for this? I mean, do you go through a tender process or just try and get
Yes.
hold of somebody that's quite keen to do it?
Well, there are a number of ways that these things move forward. The first and absolutely key thing that has to happen is that there has to be a states level decision stating we want it to happen.
Mm.
Because I mean, I've spoken to a number of developers. I brought two developers over to
Yeah,
speak to the states, and they all say, "Well, this is all very well, but you've got to say you want it to happen."
yeah,
Because they know that nothing can happen unless the government wants it to happen. So that's the very first thing. Then you need a sort of a small team and a sort of structure, maybe setting up a company or something that will then progress the matter. And in terms of how you choose a developer, we would need advice from specialists on this. And there are a number to choose from, most of them based in the UK even. But the various ways it happens, you can have something which they sort of call open door, where we just announce that we've got this area, we're open to suggestions,
Yeah.
and invite developers to come and make proposals to us. Or you can do a more structured sort of auction where you go out with a document and you say, if you want to participate in this auction, you've got to, fulfill all these details, probably make us a small payment. And you can either go out to everybody, and there are something like 70 developers globally, and well over half of them play in Europe. So there's a lot there to choose from. Or you can pre-select maybe half a dozen and have a sort of a mini auction.
Yeah, a beauty list, a beauty parade.
Yes.
Yeah, and see where you go from there.
Yes. Or of course you can just have one person, once it's known that we are ready to go ahead. Maybe someone will just come to us and say, oh yeah, we'd like to talk to you.
Yeah.
And then maybe we deal with them if they can do a good and commercially fair job for us.
If I mean, is it, obviously a lot more about these things than I do. Is it normal practice to ask for an upfront payment on these sort of things?
Well, let's just say that it's not abnormal.
No.
And when you realize that, if a developer that picks up an option will be spending tens of millions of pounds just doing their research to see if they want to go ahead. And then after a while, when they've decided that they do want to go ahead and they've got all the consents and approvals that they need, they're committing themselves to possibly, for a gigawatt wind farm, over £1 billion of expenditure.
Yeah.
You can see that in that context, saying, oh, we just want some money to cover our costs up front, it's not really an issue for them. It's not a financial issue for them. It's just a matter of deciding whether they're interested or not.
I mean, the trouble with Alderney, as you know from your past experience, and I only go back to the 1980s. You go back much further than I do. But we have found various projects in the past have stalled for one reason or another. And that's always the big worry as far as we're concerned. And the other point I'd like to make, of course, is that what happens if the developer goes bust halfway through? Do you have to try and get some sort of performance bond which will cover you, the States of Alderney, against financial loss?
Well, there is no way that we should be involved in a financial loss. We might be involved in a loss of more income.
Yeah.
But then you just license. I mean, if it's a commercially viable prospect, which it has to be, otherwise we haven't got a goer anyway.
No.
If it's a commercially viable prospect, there will be someone else that will pick it up.
Yeah. And it's not unusual.
Well, it is unusual that any of them go bust. What is not unusual is that sometimes one sells a participation to another one, or they do the development and then they say we will hand over to somebody else. They're going to pay us out, and they're going to operate it and take the ongoing electricity sales and profits. So these things go on, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about ARE here, but it's a fact that the people that were going to provide the tidal generators went bust, didn't they? The Irish firm.
Yes, I mean, tidal is not yet commercially viable. So at that time, it was just a mistake to try and say, oh, great, now we can do this. It wasn't going to happen.
But with wind, we see it. It's operating. It's going strong.
What? Wind?
Wind,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Offshore wind, absolutely, yes. Absolutely.
Do these organisations have much problems funding, receiving the money to actually make these things? I mean, if we're talking £1 billion, it's still quite a lot of money, isn't it? Even in this day and age.
Yes. I mean, most of these companies are really big companies. One of the companies that came over last year to see us, Equinor. I mean, they're a big Norwegian oil, gas, and renewable energy company. They're making, I mean, if you look at their accounts for last year, they're making something like $1 billion a month net profit.
Right.
So they have their own resources. Plus, they've got banks queuing up to
Yeah.
lend the money on safe projects or projects that they consider safe. So, and they also have associates. There are specialized financing vehicles that are investing in renewable energy. So there's lots of money out there.
And as far as you're concerned, you think, that side of it's relatively well covered.
that side of it's not an issue.
Yeah.
The thing is to get a developer who wants to do the development because they've done their research and they've convinced that it's viable.
Okay.
That's the key.
So let's take it a stage further as far as Alderney is concerned. What's in it for Alderney? We've said hopefully there's going to be some fairly cheap electricity floating around, fingers crossed. But what about licensing fees? Where do they go?
Well, they should come. They would come to the States,
Hmm.
but the typical license fee. Obviously, this is all up for negotiation. So I don't want to sort of say what our hand would be, but typically in the past, royalties or license fees have been assessed on the sales of the developer makes of the electricity, the gross sales, and the licensee gets something like 2% of those sales. So, when you do the maths, that should be worth for a 1 gigawatt wind farm, that should be worth several £1 million a year to us. And of course, if we can have a 2 gigawatt wind farm, you're doubling it. And there
Yeah.
are other ways we can get some economic benefit. One of those could be by way of taxation. So plus, of course, there will be increased use of our ports and our airports. So all these things generate revenues that supporting Alderney and Alderney's structures.
We're quite an interesting location, aren't we, in terms of taxation? I would have thought from a developer's point of view, the Channel Islands with lower tax rates are probably a much better deal than, going somewhere that's directly connected to the UK.
Yes, I think certainly the tax situation is something we can offer, which will to some extent compensate perhaps for the fact that we can't offer any actual financial incentives that the UK offers in terms of buying electricity at a certain agreed future rate.
Yeah.
So yes, that's right.
So all in all, how do you see things going forward from now, Michael?
Well, I think the first thing which will be of interest, well, I think will be the upcoming elections because we need some people elected who are capable of looking at the facts, making some informed decisions, despite the fact that it's going to be quite a big event if it happens.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first interesting event which is going to come along.
So get the election over, start lobbying. Yes. Start
Lobbying.
lobbying the members to sort of say this is a good idea, let's get on with it.
Yes, or maybe be a member.
Well, you thinking about it?
I am thinking about it, yes.
Right. They heard it first on Tony at 12. But I think I could probably promise you a vote, sir.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much. Hopefully all your listeners and viewers can as well. That would be great. Yeah.
This was a party political broadcast on behalf of Mr. Michael Turner Samuels. Michael, it's been great talking to you. I think it's a very exciting prospect. And, if you can put something like this together, it could be the salvation of Alderney. Who knows?
Yes, certainly it would solve a lot of the problems we're currently facing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you take care of yourself. Thank you very much for sparing me some time and see you around.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity for
My
presenting.
pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks.